Welcome back. Now that we have a functional Flask app, let's play around with APIs. Now, a quick refresher on what APIs are if you're not familiar with them or you've forgotten. It means Application Programmable Interface. Dog, go away. Go. Sorry, I have a dog on my chair. So what that means is that you could use an API to get information from another program, or you can use it to send information to a program to do stuff. And it's generally in a very programmatic way. So you're not just sending random things. You have to send it in a certain format, usually JSON. And it sends you information in a certain format, usually JSON. So to give you an example of what it might look like, let me pull up one of the APIs that I use to teach kid classes, which is the Pokey API. Come on, Pokey API. Which is a Pokemon API. So most kids know what Pokemon is. Actually, most adults these days know what Pokemon is. But here is what it looks like. A JSON file, if you're familiar with dictionaries in Python, look exactly the same pretty much. So here we have the ID, the name, all kinds of stuff that would make sense if you played Pokemon games or used the card game or whatever. Just all kinds of information about them. So I'm actually using the Spotify one because I figure most people watching this class might be a little bit more familiar with Spotify than with Pokemon. Also, I don't want to overload the poor dude whose API is being used. So reset, check out master, check out 14A9D4, and then clean it if you need to. You actually don't need to clean it at this point. But wait for a second. There. So let me close all of these and talk about what changed. So first, we've added a new template going to extend base.html. We have page title and content blocks. And this shouldn't say Pokemon. This should say artist. Let's save that. I actually did write it at first with the Pokemon, but there was way too much information. We have content, and we're going to be putting some kind of data in here. The next thing that changed is views.py. Views.py, and we should go to the bottom. App.route Spotify. Now we've actually imported a few things. Import JSON URL lib. These are the two things I'm importing. These are with the Python standard library. There are better ways to talk to APIs, but if you are doing it quick and dirty, I just want to grab some information, and they don't have anything that can work that you can just install. This is your quick and dirty talk to APIs, and I actually recommend doing this first and then start using other libraries, because if you do this first, you understand exactly what's going on. It makes it easier to debug later on. So JSON URL lib. So app.route Spotify. We have a function called Spotify. The URL. Here is a URL, and this is just the URL we're going to, api.spotify.com, version 1, and we're going to search for Elvis, type artist. So we're going to search for this person. The response, we're going to create a response by using URL lib. So URL lib, URL open to our URL. We're going to get a response from that. The data is going to equal JSON load s, which means load string. So what we're getting back is a string when we do this, response.read. So response.read goes to that page or whatever, reads it, returns a string. We're going to use JSON to take that string and turn it into some JSON, and we're going to save that into data. It's a whole lot of stuff going on in one line. We're going to return render.template Spotify base data equals data. And that's what we've added. Let's run it. Here's your artist. And as you can see, it's just a bunch of data. So here are the artists, and the items and the genres, and his name is Elvis, and he's rock and roll and rockabilly, and you can even have like stuff you can open, so there's some URLs, lots of stuff. APIs tend to return lots of things, and you kind of have to parse through it to get what you want. So all kinds of stuff. We've got images in here. We've got links to albums. Elvis has a lot of data on him. So this is great. And actually, this is where the end of my code ends because this is where I ran out of steam last night. But let's go ahead and try adding a new new view. So we have Spotify, artist, artist. We're going to accept artist. So see what we did here? We added to the URL artist. We're going to accept artist. And now here we have our URL. No, go to the end. There. Format. Artist equals artist. And this is just going to take the value artist and put it in, no, I put it in the wrong place, oh no. It should be here. So here we have artist, and we're just inserting that value into it. We're going to get the response, and we're going to load it. So let's try this out. Let's see if I did it correctly. We'll do Adele. Let's see if it worked. Oh no. I got some kind of error. Okay. All I have to do is close this. When you save a file, it automatically tries to reload. Flash tries to reload if you're running in debug. And in this case, it hit an error and it just stopped. And it doesn't care if you save again and fix it. No. And see, I ran the wrong thing. Boo. Okay, go to run.py. Run it. And let's see if it works. Live coding. Never do live coding. It worked! Adele! Adele's right there. So this is one of the things, like you can actually, get dynamic data and query another API. Now the reason I use Spotify is that Spotify has a few things that don't require an API key. 99.9% of APIs now require an API key. And good Lord, that is not something I want to walk everyone through. Generally, if you want to figure out how to do it, people have written blog posts, there's plenty of documentation. Just look for, whatever you want to access, like Google Maps API key, and they will, lay it out for you. Some API keys are, and they do that basically to, first of all, track how people are using the API, like individuals. And they also use it to track, like, okay, how many times are you hitting it? That if you're somebody who's hitting it 10,000 times in an hour, they may want to restrict you. Like a lot of APIs will say you can only make 300 calls an hour or something like that. So that, and if you want more than that, you've got to pay us. Or they just outright say, nope, you can't. We're not dealing with it. So that's why I use Spotify. That's also why I use the Pokey API. The Pokey API does not have any limitations on it. So, and by the way, not all of Spotify allows this. This is just one of those calls that does allow calls without a key. So that is how, and this is one of those things that I really like. And the reason I showed you, it seems like a kind of silly example, but there's a good reason I do this, is because I think one of the powerful things you can do with Flask is actually talking to another API. Now, an API you may use is Jira. Jira has an API. So if you get a key to like your Jira instance, you can make custom views, which is really nice because if you have a by the way, if you don't know, Jira is a ticketing system that is like the new popular thing, enterprisey level. So with Jira, you can, get custom views for you that make sense for you because sometimes creating new filters is, it's okay, it's pretty powerful, but we're developers, we want more power. Or you just want something in a prettier format that maybe you can show somebody who you don't want in your ticketing system, like a customer. Never let customers in your ticketing system, ever. But it may be something like, here are all the tickets in your current release, and here's their status, and there you go. And we don't want to show you the comments where we say things like, this customer is an idiot. Like, you don't want them to see that. Or you don't want to see them to see the where the developer estimated 4 hours, because often the customers will think, okay, so exactly 4 hours from now I will get this feature, which is not the case. But you would show stuff like description and title and status, like here's where they are. So those are some of the interesting things you can do with Flask. Now, some people talk about using a database with Flask. Oh, and by the way, let me go ahead and check this in. Since already here, git status, git commit -a. Oh, make it bigger. All right. Oh, wait, I don't want to do this. Control X, no. Git stash. I'm going to do some Git magic here, if I spell it right, so everybody can grab it. Git checkout master, git stash apply, git commit -a, search for anyone, git push. And I do have a class on Git that I'll be teaching later this year, so I will explain all this magic and more, and how you could totally like screw yourself up using Git. So anyway, talking about databases, a lot of people talk about they want a database with Flask, and in fact, when you look on many tutorials for deployment, the first thing they do is like, here's how you set up a database. You don't need a database with Flask, and honestly, if you want to set up a database with Flask that Flask is going to be using and storing its data in there, I usually say, why don't you check out Django? Because doing things like migrations and tending the care and tending of your database is no frickin' joke. So that's just one of those things I would recommend doing that instead. Nothing against Flask, but Flask doesn't come with database capabilities. You have to install other things. Now, if you're using someone else's database, if you actually have like access, like read-only access to their database, that's actually a cool thing to do. I did that with Track once. I'm probably dating myself, but back when Track was the hot thing for your wiki and ticketing system, I had read-only access to a Track database, which I would use to generate reports for one of the managers who did not like how Track had like Track reports. And I would send that to her. And I had read-only database. It worked. It was like, okay, that's fine. But yeah, if you need your own database and your app is getting more complex, go ahead and move over to Django. If you're very familiar with Flask, Django's not going to be a huge leap for you. So, some reading. Some of the stuff that my favorite thing that I just go to every time is the Flask Mega Tutorial. And I will post the links in all the chats. Oh, it's going to take a while to load. Come on. So basically, the Flask Mega Tutorial is great, and it goes over pretty much anything you would ever want to do. with Flask. From the very basics to setting it up, all the way to deployment, which we're going to touch on a bit today. I'm not going to touch on, we're not actually going to deploy anything, because deployment is like its whole other thing, which I'll get into in a minute. And oh, I can't believe it's not coming up for me. It came up earlier. So here we go. There we go. There it is. And it is. I mean, look at everything it goes through. And this is actually one of the things I used to create this class. So definitely go through here, run through it all, and it will get to databases. It actually gets to databases really early. So if you want to experiment with that, go right ahead. Also, this gentleman, Miguel, has Introduction to Flask video through O'Reilly. He also has a book, which it's not showing on here. Flask book. If you go to flaskbook.com, there's a link. He also wrote a really great book, Flask Web Development. I highly recommend it. I read it. I really liked it. It is more in depth than the mega tutorial, although he does keep the mega tutorial up to date. So those are two things. Those are actually the top two things that I recommend. Also, the Flask Docs are really good. They're very readable. And it's one of, not everything that we have in the open source community, bless our hearts, is readable. Theirs is extremely readable. So go there, read that, go check out some of their stuff. They get even more in depth. So that's where I would go. And unlike other things where I have a ton of resources, I really think that these are the three things you should go check out, because if you go through them, you will have all kinds of Flask knowledge. And of course, while you're checking it out, actually code, because it's useless knowledge until you use it. So deploying. Let's see. So deploying. There are some options. So Cloud9 actually works with Heroku. Heroku is a place you can get Heroku.com. I think this is going to load up my dashboard. No, I don't want to open up my dashboard. If you go to Heroku.com, you can actually spin up free, I can not really use servers, they have a different name for them, but little images that you can serve your Flask site on. In fact, screen sign, this right here, yes, screen sign is on Heroku. Now, one warning: if you use the free Heroku servers, and I feel really bad that I don't remember what they're called right now, since I use Heroku for my job. They're free, but you actually have to spin them up. So if you want to use it, you have to load the page, wait, and I often just reload the page and then it's up. So it's not ideal. It's great for experimenting, and Heroku is not a cheap option for hosting. There are, I believe, cheaper options, but if you like convenience, it's not too expensive. So another option, and it works with Cloud9. So Cloud9 actually has instructions, you can actually deploy from your Cloud9 instance and it'll push it up to a Heroku instance and boom, you have a website. You can also use WebFaction, you can use AWS, those are some great ones. AWS is probably going to be your cheapest, because I think that you can use its lowest tier, even, I don't know if it still has the free tier, but you can use a very low tier and it'll be perfectly fine for Flask. Now, about deploying, why I'm not doing deployment in the last half hour that we have. Deployment is no joke. A lot of these things are a little intense, so you probably want to follow the instructions for each one. Usually, and I think AWS, WebFaction, and definitely Cloud9 and Heroku have instructions on how to get Flask up, or there are really good blog posts about it. But after that, there's a lot of maintenance and a lot of stuff that I just don't have the time to get into. And also, I'm running out of voice, as you can probably hear as I get really froggy. So those are my thoughts on deployment. Now, I do want to do a class later this year that we may talk about deployment. We're actually going to do a Linux class, but I wouldn't worry about deploying until you're more comfortable on servers. And actually, when you're starting out, Heroku is not a bad place to start with the free one, even though it's something you couldn't show the world. ScreenSign is something literally only I just use. Like, that's it. And all ScreenSign is, it's like 3 paths. One is a Google font, and one is some text, and it shows it here. And I basically made it for these classes so I could post a bunch of text up. And there are ways I could make it better. I don't care. I literally just needed to say, hi, I'm ScreenSign, or welcome to the class, or whatever. And that's the end of the class. Thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, hit me up on my channel in the comments or on Twitter at @kcunning. Any ideas for future classes are welcome, as well as smaller videos that I might make to answer any questions that beginners commonly have. Thanks again, and have a great day.